Welcome to the Big Woods Bucks podcast. I'm your host, Hal Blood, sitting here again with my buddy, Good Lee Shands, and we're still up to Paul Hughes up here in Fort Fairfield, Maine, in his studio. Shout out to Paul and big thanks for letting him use his studio and actually edit these for us. And don't forget his podcast is Maine Outdoor Enthusiast. Get on there and subscribe to his channel too. He's always has some good stories he tells. And so again, thanks for the comments. We appreciate them. We want to know what you're thinking about, what you want to know about. So we'll try to answer the comments timely, and if you have any topics you want us to cover, we can do it. Also, our sister podcast, the Adirondack podcast, you can get that on a Big Woods channel on YouTube or on your iTunes or Spotify. You'll have to click to subscribe to those differently there. But anyways, and once again, you can go to our website to check out whatever we got going on there, plenty of it. Today, we're going to talk about, what are we talking about today, Lee?
Well, it's kind of, there's different parts of this. I don't know if you call it a question that's been posed to us, but it's a topic anyway. We're going to talk about what's an ethical shot and what isn't, shooting at running deer.
Yeah,
and
shooting in the big woods in general. And I think most of it is through comments. We get on different videos and films and stuff. We get comments and we monitor those and see what people think. But we get an awful lot of, not a lot. We get some comments on either shooting at running deer, or sometimes they're about shooting in the brush or something like that. And I get it. A lot of you might not understand that it's a totally different hunt here. And most people are used to watching films where a deer is out in the open in a field, and they got to wait for it to clear every blade of grass before they shoot, and they want to call it an ethical shot. And the same people that call it an ethical shot are willing to shoot 500 yards at a deer. Well, I think it's more ethical for me to shoot at 40 yards at a running deer than trying to shoot 500 yards. So it's everybody's choice, I guess, or perception of it is right. That's anybody's perception of what's ethical. So we have to deal with certainly a lot different. We've talked about the woods, the kind of woods and all that, but basically, if you can wrap your head around it, the woods are thick for the most part. I mean, there's 100 yards in the woods here is a long shot. I mean, if you could shoot, and I've shot, all the bucks I've shot over the years, the furthest I've ever shot one is 120 paces. I paced it off because it was open hardwoods and it was running. And I killed it at 120 paces running. Open hardwoods. But that's rare. That's like a long way in the hardwoods. Most of the deer I've killed are under 50, probably you too. You shot a few in cuts over the years back in the day when there was more cuts. But, so anyways, we have to shoot when the opportunity presents itself. Now, and I tell people, I hear a lot of the guys telling their stories that they just start putting the lead to them and they got to empty their gun. I personally don't do that. I don't pull the trigger unless I think I can hit the buck. I won't pull the trigger. But when I do, it's because I think I can get him, even if it's running. But you don't see all the twigs and brush. You don't see it all. You see the deer, and there's you try to avoid the biggest things, the trees basically, but you can't see when this stuff happens in a hurry, you can't see it. So you aim at the deer, and whether it's running or standing there, if it's standing, it's easier because you might be able to pick an open. He might be in the brush, but there's a little spot where it's not as thick as the other stuff, and you think you can sneak a bullet down through, and that's your shot. Bottom line is, if you don't take those shots, you're probably never going to shoot, and you're probably never going to kill a buck in the big woods because you rarely ever get a chance in the wide open. So that's what we have to do, and quite frankly, people, anything you see on our channel, hopefully you don't question that, because we're probably some of the most honest and ethical hunters there are. It's just that we hunt a different way, and we have to shoot a different way. So that's what we wanted to talk about. Here's a few words from our sponsors. They're all top-notch people. We're glad to have them aboard. Make sure you support them. That's what keeps us going. Being the low-tech guy I am, there's one thing I've learned to embrace with technology, and it's my Onyx. I used to carry maps and GPS when it finally came out and stuff, but the Onyx has eliminated that because I've got my GPS in my phone now with my Onyx app. I can mark everything in that. It's helpful that I can show other people by putting a pin in if I want to send somebody to a place. Being a guide, that's important, I can give them the pin, put it in there, I text it to them, whatever. So if you want to get your Onyx, get your Big Woods Bucks code, BWB, and get you 20% off, but I highly recommend it. Give you a little update. Skinner Sights. We all know they're the best site going, but it's a great company because Andy and the crew there are innovative, and they're always thinking up either new models to make a site for, improve the sites, making mounts for scopes, and now they've come on with their own line of scopes and red dots. Whatever Andy does in the company, it's top-notch, first quality, and they stand behind everything, and we're glad to have them as a partner, and we hope you'll try their sites, and you can trust your life with those, and they're going to get you the game. So get your Skinner Sights, and you can trust me that you're going to be glad you did. Just wanted to talk a little bit about minus 33 in the wool they have, which I believe is best wool going, whether it's base layers or your socks or whatever you're wearing. You got to have wool. I've been stressing that for people for years, to wear your wool, whether it's the outerwear or even your base layers and socks. I've been to the tour of the plant, see how they make their socks, and it's quality, the fit is right, and they're going to be long lasting. I've got socks I've had now for several years, and they look like I'll have them for several years more before they even think about wearing out. So I trust my life to wool, and you can too. Minus 33. All right, back to the podcast. A good example is, Lee, I remember you had a story about one of your earlier bucks there that you kept shooting down through the brush, and finally about the fourth shot, you got a bullet down through there. You cleared the brush out.
That was one of my best bucks, and it's the only time, and I had 4 guys there to bear witness, but it's the only time I ever tracked a buck on dry ground. There was no snow, and I tracked him quite a ways. But what had happened was the day before, it had rained really hard, but then it turned off cold during the night, so there was like the ground was frozen on top. And I remember we were driving out. It was up to a place I used to hunt out by Eagle Mountain, and I'd killed a huge buck there the year before. So we had driven down the start of that road that went out by Eagle Mountain, and I don't remember if it was my dad or my cousin. One of them had to take a leak. So it was my cousin's truck, I remember that, and my dad was in the front with me, and then I think 2 cousins and a buddy in the back. So when I stop and pull over to the road so that my father or my cousin can get out, I look over and there's a bird in the ditch over there. Well, my buddy had shot a buck the week before and was just going to come up and hunt birds around where we were buck hunting. So anyway, he gets out to shoot that bird, and my dad said...
Wasn't a chickadee, was it?
No, partridge. I didn't say that. When we're talking about birds in Maine, we're talking about grouse. So my dad says, look, there's a deer right down there on the side of the road. And then my cousin, who was younger, his eyes are probably better, he said, look at the size of those horns. And so we used to call them horns. We know they're antlers, but So my buddy that's got the shotgun and was going to shoot the grouse, I said, run up into the woods, I said, and just hunt around and hunt birds right here or whatever. There's a big buck in front of us. Well, we were on a peninsula. It's kind of like when we were up in Ontario, we're hunting on a peninsula, right? Because Moosehead Lake's all out around that. So we walk down the road. Everybody loads their guns. We walk down the road, and when that buck crossed the road, I mean, he had a gigantic track when he crossed the road. And when he went down through the ditch and he got up into the leaves, I could look up through those. It was open hardwoods there. That part hadn't been cut, but I could see dimples through that open hardwoods from the road. I thought, I think I can follow him just in the dimples. So the other guys went down the road and tried to get up ahead. I got on the track and tracked it. And I know for sure that road that goes out towards the lake is more than a half a mile long, probably closer to a mile. And I tracked him down pretty close to the lake. And when you got down to the lake, there was a place that they had cut it a few years before, and it had grown up to mostly popple and maple whips. So I tracked that buck on bare ground. And when I got out to the edge of that cut, there was one little clump of firs out in the middle of it. And I saw something white. You know, I was younger then. My eyes were really good. I thought, I think that might be a deer's throat patch. So I had a scope on that gun that day. It was a 7x57 Mauser with I think I had a 4-power Leupold on it. I picked it up, and sure enough, I could see a white throat patch, but that's about all I could see. So I'm just watching it. And then it ended up, he turned his head, and when he turned his head, I could see he had really big, long main beams. And then he put it back, and I thought, well, I'm going to shoot him right in that white throat patch. So I fired. Nothing happened. It was a bolt action. I jacked another shell in. I fired again. Nothing happened. I fired the third time, and by then I'm a little bit, I know my gun's sighted in because I shoot all the time.
How far was it?
It was probably a little over 100 or right around 100. But it was a 98 Mauser, and it had a controlled round feed just like a Winchester Model 70. Well, the trouble when you short shuck those, because what happened was the claw extractor still had a hold of that empty, but after the third shot, and it takes quite a lot to get me excited, but I thought, man, he's going to take off. I didn't quite get that round out, and I pushed it forward, and the one that came up in the clip came up against it. So I had two shells like jammed into the chamber, right? So I grabbed one with my thumbnail, and I tried to pull it out, and I remember it pulled my thumbnail right back from my finger. And I'm looking, and that deer's still standing there. He's in that little clump of firs, and he don't want to leave it, right? So I get my belt knife out, dig the empty out, chamber another shot, and fired. And on the fourth shot, I shot him right in that white patch on his throat. So, yeah, that was one of those things that, I don't know, was it an unethical shot? I don't think so. It wasn't that far. I know that the guys were out in behind me, and that's another thing that he wanted us to touch on is people that are so worried about hitting somebody behind you. In the Maine woods, most of the time, even if you're group hunting, the chance of one of your buddies being close to you when you're shooting at a deer like that, next to nothing, because we would spread out and head in all directions. So I wasn't worried about that.
I remember you saying there was the whips in the cut you were shooting through.
Well, what happened was I couldn't see all them little whips. They were about the size of your index finger probably. Most of them were maples and popples. What was happening was my buddy went back afterwards. When I went to tag the deer, my buddy went back, and I'd hit about 12 of those maple and popple whips and cut them right off. You could see it. He said you could look down through there and see them things laying right off sideways or cut right off. And that's what I did was I cleared a path to that deer before I hit it.
And luckily he was one of them ones that would stick around after he was getting shot at. So he got the Darwin Award, didn't he?
Well, I think what it was it was not really a clear cut, but it was open enough, and he was in that thick clump, and probably because he probably didn't even know where I was, because I was 100 yards away from him, he probably felt pretty safe and secure in that little clump of furs, and so he didn't want to leave it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've shot lots and lots of them in the brush. I tried, if they're standing there or walking or something, I just try to pick the most open spot. Well, I had one, I was telling you, that one I call my SOS Buck I shot a few years ago. That's all I could see on that one. After I tracked, I could see his white patch and nothing else. And once in a while, I could see an antler flick or something, or a tail flick. And no, I didn't see the white patch at first. I'd see an antler move, then I'd see a tail flick, but I couldn't see the body. It was right in the thick furs and close, like 25 yards from me. And I finally inched my way down. I'd bleat and I'd take a step, and I finally got down, and then I could see the white patch. Probably a horn too, but I could see it. And I said, well, there he is right there. And I just put it on the white patch and let her rip. You got to pick your openings, you know. Everybody thinks you got to shoot them right behind the shoulder. And if you know, you should learn the anatomy of a deer or any animal that matter, moose, bear, what are you hunting, and figure out ahead of time, not in the moment, because in the moment you don't have time, right? You should get it imprinted in your mind where to hold at all these different angles and stuff. And that way you'll automatically know, and you won't have to guess about, geez, is that a good shot or whatever. But anytime in the neck, you dead center the neck is a good shot. But mainly what I do, because we have a lot of brush, I don't like a behind-the-shoulder shot. Yeah, if you're out in the field and you punch them behind the shoulder, they probably won't make it out of the field or whatever. But in the woods, you punch them behind the shoulder, and, I mean, it's going to kill them if you hit them there, and there's no question it's going to kill. I ain't saying it's not a kill shot, but the problem is I always I dead center the shoulder, top to bottom, front to back, right dead center on the middle of the shoulder, because it's got the most room for error.
Margin of error.
The margin of error is the greatest, is the least. If you aim behind the shoulder and you hit a twig and that deflects it 6 inches back and you gut shoot them, now you got a problem. So you see, and again, you might not see that stick. So the people that say, well, there's too much brush, when you're in the moment, I can guarantee you don't see it. You're not gonna
saw all that brush.
You're not going to see the brush. You won't see it. So if you dead center it, you're probably in that margin of error, you're going to get one into the vital somewhere in that shoulder. It might behind it. So that's the way and I'm not saying everybody shoots that way, but that's the way I've always shot. Dead center on the shoulder. I've always told my bear hunters, dead center on the shoulder. And it's a good kill shot, and there's some margin for error if you hit something else. But I remember one time we hunted up in New Brunswick for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years back in the 80s when I was lobstering. We'd go up there for a week, and I remember one time we had snow and it was noisy, it was crusty or something, and I was trying to do the best I could sneaking around there, and I sat down on a log. I don't know if I was having a sandwich, but I just kind of got there, and it was kind of hard, mostly hard woods. And I looked, and I could see a buck coming up through there, plodding along. And when I first see him, he was probably 75 yards, and he's kind of quartering towards me, and then he's going to go across in front of me. And so I got ready, and at that time I was using my 270 with that low-power scope. So I just followed him along. I could see him perfectly, and when he got, out behind a tree there, I'd fire, and he never even did anything. He just kept walking, and I fired again, and he just keeps on walking, doesn't look, doesn't do anything, just like nothing's happening. 4 times I fired at that thing until he disappeared, and I'm like, my gun's got to be off. There's no way I could miss, because I think he was probably only maybe 50 yards when he went up by me. And I'm like, I was just shaking my head. I couldn't believe I could miss. And then I said, well, I got to go down there and check for blood, of course. Anyways, I'm walking down there, and what I didn't realize, once I started walking, I'm looking, and I was right in a patch of that witch hobble. And that witch hobble is, sometimes you get into a sea of it, and it's just endless. And it all, like, I call it witch hobble because it all grows together. It's not like straight up and down whips. And to me, I never even saw it when I was shooting. All I focused on, I could see the brown deer walking along, and I could see the whole deer. But what I didn't realize was I was shooting through, I don't know how much, but a fair amount of that witch hobble. I never got a bullet down through there. Hi, Hal here, host of the Big Woods Bucks podcast. We're excited to announce our partnership with the most respected and recognized land company in the Northeast, Christmas and Associates Land Company. Owners Dan and Mark Christmas are two upstate New York natives with deep roots in the Adirondacks and Tug Hill Plateau, as well as two of the most passionate big woods hunters you'll meet. Whether it's newly constructed camp surrounded by state wilderness or family getaway, their team of experienced land guides are the best at matching folks with a perfect land track at an affordable price. They even provide financing. Christmas Land Guides will provide full land tours using ATVs, snowmobiles, and even snowshoes so that you can scout every acre. Christmas Land and Camp staff also help you construct the camp you've always dreamed of using our in-the-house master builders. For over 35 years, no one in New York State has provided more big buck properties and family hunting camps to hundreds of folks who love the woods than Christmas and Associates Land Company. Dan and Mark and the whole company remain dedicated to wise land conservation and treating everyone they meet like family. Always available 7 days per week unless there's fresh tracking snow. Call 800-229-7843 or visit Land and Camps on Facebook or go to landandcamps.com.
One of the things that bears mentioning too is people got to remember is, again, the majority of the deer we're shooting at are 50 yards. So if you hit if the deer is in the brush and the brush isn't too far in front of him, if the brush is like basically just in front of his shoulder, even if it deflects it a little bit, it isn't going to be enough to make any difference.
Yeah. It's the long range shooting is more deflective, especially if the closer to the barrel you hit something, the more deflection you have. I remember Woody's still sick about one up in Ontario there that he was setting in. He found this good spot out in the cut, and this big buck comes out. He shoots at it, and it jumps away, and couldn't believe he walked over. He couldn't believe he didn't hit it, but he didn't. And right at the end of his gun barrel, he was sitting in a clump of firs. There was a little fir limb, and I mean a little one. I don't mean like a limb that come out off the trunk of it. It was so soft that you wouldn't think it would matter. But he hit that, because you could see it scun down the side of that limb, maybe an inch or so down the side of the limb. It probably just like blew it like sideways a little bit and shaved that down that side. But it was right at the end of his barrel. He was sticking his barrel in the firs there. And he never hit that deer because it was so close to the end of the barrel.
We've talked about before, and I know this is true, like a patched round ball in a muzzleloader is worthless in the brush. They don't penetrate any brush. No. But even if you're shooting in a 50 caliber, 225 or 250 grain bullet really isn't very long. It's quite short and fat. I don't think they penetrate the brush like a 180 grain .6. A muzzleloader is slow enough and short enough. They don't penetrate brush like an .6 would.
No. They you got to have it. You got to be mindful. I learned that earlier on, and I just got mindful. And of course, you only got one shot, so I'm less likely to take a shot with a muzzleloader unless I got a clear opening I can shoot through than I would be with a rifle. Because if you got a rifle, you shoot, and if you miss, you're probably going to get another chance, running down by you. But with a muzzleloader, you touch her off, and you ain't getting another shot unless he stops or something, So yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So anyways, that's just the reality. If you want to hunt here, you're going to have to take the shots that present itself. And again, the way I shoot is I shoot with a peep sight. It doesn't matter if you got a scope or whatever you're using. Too many people focus on, and we talked about this before about, sighting in or getting ready. Too many people focus on trying to drive tacks and instead of just shooting offhand. Most people want to just shoot off the bench, right? Well, that doesn't tell you anything except your gun shoots, So I've always told people just pick it up and shoot and practice that way offhand. And guiding, we see it so many times. People throw their gun up to shoot, and we've already pulled the trigger 6 times, and there's still the gun's there, and then all of a sudden you see the barrel start weaving around, and then you know what's happening, right? They ain't gonna hit nothing.
Overthinking it.
Yeah, they ain't gonna hit nothing. Seen that 100 times over the years that they're trying to focus on some particular spot they want to shoot, trying to find the right hair or something, and they end up muffing it, not shooting, not hitting them. So if you just pull it up and pull the trigger the second your crosshair, your bead, or whatever hits the dead center of the shoulder, snap the trigger off, that's where you're going to hit.
The longer you hold it and think about it, the less likely you're going to be.
Yeah. You can, if you don't believe that, anybody can go out to the range or just pick their gun up and try it. You try to hold on something, even for 10 seconds, try to hold your gun steady, and then that magnifies with distance, right? It's different if it's 10 yards from you. If it's 100 yards from you, you go out and try to hold that bead or crosshair on something at 100 yards and see how much that dances around there. Okay. So, but if you pull the trigger immediately, that's where you're going to hit.
Make sure there's nothing wrong with shooting on the bench, but that's for your gun, to make sure your gun's sighted in. So make sure that your gun is sighted in, and if it shoots 1-inch groups or 2-inch groups, that's fine. But after you know the gun's sighted in, I did this with Stephen, and my father did it with me, is you have them stand up and walk around like a real life hunting situation. But I definitely did with Stephen. I would have him shoot a box or 2 of shells. We'd walk around in the woods behind my house and, pick out a target that's 50 or 60 or 70 yards away, because that's what he's going to be shooting at, and just pick up, like you said, and as soon as that bead is centered on your target, pull the trigger. And not to oversimplify it, but 1-inch groups at 100 yards, that's fine. That means your gun sighted in. But if you took an 8-inch pie plate at 50 to 75 yards and standing up, you can consistently put all your bullets in that, you're going to get your deer, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty simple, but that's the reality of it.
Yeah, that's it. You don't have to be able to drive a tack offhand at 50 yards or whatever. So, but you got to be able to get the shot off quickly is the important thing. And I think that's why sometimes you're watching our films or whatever, and if you do see us shoot it, you see how quick it can happen, but you're not really seeing you're not getting the full effect of it really, because there's so many things from the time you spot a deer to the time you shoot. Your mind is like, there's 100 thoughts racing through it, right? Because you're trying to size up. It's almost like situational awareness. You gotta think about the whole thing. Buck might be standing there, whatever, and you're thinking about, geez, he gonna bolt? What's his? I always look at him, and you can usually tell if you do it enough. The demeanor of a deer or something, whether he's ready to bolt or whatever. But your only focus should be is getting your shot off as quickly as you can. Your focus isn't waiting for him to step into some opening where there isn't a twig in the way or anything like that. But by shooting fast, you'll be more accurate. But again, that's where when you got to do something fast, if you don't get the shoulder shot, it's not the end of the world, because there's other places that are deadly. You know, like if you have to shoot at the neck, or you can if it's broadside, the closer you are to the base of the head, there's less size to the neck, and you're more likely to hit the spine or the jugular or both or whatever. But down here, you know, once, like on a big buck, the neck is, you know, pretty big. You can get one through the neck without hitting the spine and have a bad time. But so, you know, just try to make those type of shots, and then know your angles, either head on or facing away. If you got to know your angle to get it in the vitals, either behind the shoulder and how far behind it, or broadside is dead broadside in the shoulder, or if they're coming towards you, you know, if it's straight head on. The straight head on shot, the best one really when they're walking towards you or standing there, is right at the top of the brisket. A lot of people, I think, tend to shoot too low on that shot, and then they end up getting off underneath the shoulder or getting too low. But if you put it right with that neck, the top of that curly Q hair on the brisket, that's the end of them, because you're going to break that. You're going to break the spine, and you're probably going to take the top of the heart, everything else off. But so just learn that. You can go online and look at that stuff, and you know, look at the anatomies and angles and stuff. But it's not rocket science, and I think too many people try to think into it too deeply, huh? And that's why they get confused about it.
One other thing that we didn't touch on, but I think some people, and this is like an ego thing, they're talking about a one-shot kill. Well, it's nice if you shoot your animal and just boom, down it goes. But again, the reality of it in Maine, whether it's on deer, but especially moose are a big, hardy animal. And they don't usually go that far. If you shoot one through the shoulders, he's probably not going to go that far, but very rarely do you drop him right there at the shot. Yeah. So what I always tell my clients is make your first shot count, but then shoot until you can't see him anymore, because you don't know if you pulled one side or the other. And the more lead you get into him, once you've already made the commitment and hit him, shoot until you can't see him anymore, because at the very least, it's going to make a shorter haul out, right?
Yeah, there's too many people, I think, that in their mind, there's no way they could miss. So they're already congratulating themselves. They fire once, don't even rack around, and they're congratulating themselves. Meanwhile, the deer or moose or bear, whatever, is running away. So yeah, that's a good point, Lee. I always, to this day, I keep shooting till, like on a buck, if I see him hit right in the shoulder and he's running, I give him another one till he goes down, you know.
I tell people, and you get to see your clients shoot more moose than you do deer in a season usually. But if they're worried about, well, I don't want to stave any meat up, trust me, a moose or a big deer has got so much meat, it's not going to amount to anything, especially on a moose. Shoot till they don't wiggle.
Even on a deer, if you shoot right through the shoulders, what are you going to lose? 5 pounds of meat?
Yeah.
I've had people before say, well, I didn't want to ruin any meat, so I didn't shoot there. And I'm like, well, now you don't have any meat.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, to me, that's a no-brainer. You're going to lose 5 pounds and keep the other 100, or you're going to have none. Yeah.
Another thing that and again, this is mostly about deer, but on moose, because they don't usually drop right at the shot, you almost never drop them right there. We've had a lot of comments, like when we post pictures of our moose, like last year, we had a daughter and a father. And the daughter shot, and we let her shoot first. Stephen was guiding them. But then, immediately afterward, the father shoots. Because why wouldn't you want to make sure that once you've shot at it, the thing's not going to get away? And we had some negative comments on that post that Stephen posted, but both the father and the daughter drilled that moose through the shoulder, but for whatever reason, he had his steam up or whatever, he made it off the road and out of sight, and we had all kinds of negative comments, but it's because they weren't there, they have no idea what happened. But again, once you've made the commitment to shoot until you can't shoot anymore.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. So, but anyways, yeah. And then study up, get the anatomy, know when. But I'm not telling everybody just to shoot. Like I said, the one thing I know is if you don't ever shoot, you'll never get any practice to see what happens.
Yeah.
So if you shoot and you miss, no big deal. I think last fall, I spent all that time with Ryland, and I think he was so afraid of missing, he wouldn't shoot at those big bucks, One, the first biggest one we saw, that big one, he was jumping. And I know afterwards I could see what he was seeing. He could see it through that hazelnut brush we just talked about, but he could see it come up and down, but he just didn't have the experience to know when to pull the trigger when it come up or something, which is fine. He's young. And then on the other one, I didn't realize it till afterwards, but it was standing there at about, I'd guess, 60 yards behind the blowdown, but he could see his face and his top of his neck. And he didn't think that was a good shot, or he didn't want to. He'd heard somewhere. That's the problem. You hear somewhere that it's not a good shot. Well, you don't know it's not a good shot if you haven't done it, So he didn't get that buck either. So, but it's all part of lessons. You learn lessons as you go along, and so one thing we know, right? What happens if you don't shoot?
You don't get any of them.
If you never shoot, you're not going to get them. And again, if you're not going to try a shot, worst thing you do is you miss, and then you say, okay, I missed because of this, and you'll have a learning experience from it. But if you think you can get them, take the shot, And again, don't try to shoot through 100 yards or 50 yards of solid brush maybe, but if you got an opening, or maybe he's standing in some brush and there's not much in between there, take a shot, for the shoulder, the big part of it, and you're probably going to get them. But again, you won't know unless you do it.
And as far as being dangerous, we've had a few people have said, well, if it's thick and you can't, see through that, aren't you worried about what's, your target on the other side or whatever? I guess my response to that would be, if you're out in the Midwest watching a food plot and there's a deer standing out in the middle of it and you shoot at it, you'd be more likely to hit something beyond your target than you would in the main woods, because again, it's so thick, the chances of you hitting somebody very far beyond that deer is almost nothing.
Yeah, for the most part, it's going to be, it's going to hit the ground before it gets 20 yards beyond the deer. But other than that, it's probably going to ricochet off 10 trees before it gets 10 yards from them, Yeah.
I've never had in the 25 years that I've been guiding, I've never had a client or myself shoot at a deer and then afterwards have somebody pop out behind it, because that's just not the way.
No.
That's not the way we hunt. Most of the time where we are, there's nobody else out there. That's why, Stephen and I sometimes will comment, if I'm with Stephen and we're out tracking bucks, I might bump into him or I might bump into you, but we ain't going to bump into anybody else.
Right. Yeah, the odds of seeing somebody is so slim. Like I said, I've been hunting up north here for 45 years, and I can probably, if I couldn't count them on two hands, it's two hands and my piggy toes, the hunters I've seen in the woods in that length of time. I hardly ever see any. Funny thing is, I actually saw two last year. That kind of added 2 toes or fingers to it. But I go year after year sometimes and never see a hunter in the woods. Oh, you might see one out by his truck in the road, but I mean actually in the woods somewhere, you know. So, yeah, and you still be careful, but the odds of shooting somebody in the woods up here is astronomically.
Yeah. What we're more concerned about, and if anybody had ever been hunting with us, is when we're lugging clients around, or like you've got your grandson Rylan, is that their gun's always pointed in a safe direction, and that they're checking their safety periodically. I tell my clients, I don't want to, and I'm not trying to offend you, but even if I do, I'm going to do it anyway. Through the course of the day, I'll probably ask them 3 or 4 times, check your safety.
Yeah.
You know, because you don't know, and most of the time I'm ahead of them. I'm going to tell you to
You
check
can
your
bump
safety.
your safety off just going through. I've done it many a times. I'm going along, ducking under through stuff and come out and I check my own safety 10, 20 times a day.
Yeah.
Because I know you can knock that off. Mine has got that big head on it on the cross bolt. And sometimes all of a sudden I say, geez, my safety's off. I check it and it's off. Well, I bumped into something along the way there. So, yeah, I've always told people too, my clients behind me, I'd look down and I go, your safety's good. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, that's more dangerous than thinking you're going to shoot somebody else in the woods. So, yeah, anyway, I think we covered that enough. And what else we should talk about?
Well, Scott wanted us to talk about vehicles. Some people had questions about vehicles, and we both have got. You go ahead and pick 2 with a good story, and I'll pick a couple with a good story, and we'll call that good.
Yeah. So, anyways, now that you know what you're up against shooting, now you know what you got to have for a vehicle in the woods. I actually had a guy last fall came up from North Carolina to hunt with us, and he only had a 2-wheel drive pickup. And he was coming Thanksgiving week. So I said, good chance there's going to be snow on the roads and stuff. So I said, you'll be all right. I said, if you maybe throw a couple of them bags of sand in the back and bring tire chains. And he did. And he crept down some of them roads because they were snowy that whole week. But what I'm getting at is you got to be prepared. Don't just show up with baloney skin tires or summer treads and think you're going to get very far. And a lot, because we know the only roads that end up getting plowed anyways are the ones they're logging on. So for every one's plowed, there's 10 more that ain't, right?
Right.
Or more than 10, probably 20. So they're going to plow the main logging roads and then the side roads where they're logging, and that's usually all that's getting plowed. And they get packed down pretty good with people going on the roads that aren't plowed, and then they'll get the tire tracks will pack it down and it'll kind of become icy and stuff. So, but anybody coming up, 4-wheel drive's kind of important, really. You could get away with it if you wanted without 4-wheel, but bring tire chains. Actually, tire chains are a pretty good idea no matter what, because sometimes we get enough snow or it gets icy enough where probably want to put your chains on. So I carry them in my Ram Charger. Once we get snow on the road, I don't without snow, but once we get snow, because the tires I run on that aren't that they're mud tires more than snow tires. And even though it's got positive rear end, which is another downfall in the snow because it wants to push you sideways if you start to slip. But if I put my tire chains on it, it's going. Wherever I point it, it's going.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So some of the things to bring if you're going to come up and hunt for your vehicle would be if you've got a winch on the front, you're ahead of the game. Just remember, if it's on the front, that's the way you're going. So if you get stuck going forward, you're going to have to pull yourself forward and then maybe again when you're on your way out. If you don't have a winch, one item that's a really good tool is a high lift jack.
I was going to tell you've always had one in yours.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't take it in the Ram Charger because I got the winch on that and stuff, but I always carried it. I'd put it right in my pickup. I'd put it right in the corner on my steel rack and bungee it in there, and it was there for the whole fall. Actually, I left it there for the winter. I'd keep it there for the winter too, running the logging roads. But if you don't know what a high lift jack is, it's a big, stout, heavy jack. It's like the old fashioned jacks you had back in the 60s when you had a car jack. You just pump it up. It's click, 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 and you pump it up that way. And but it's you can get them 3 feet or 4 feet. You're better off to get the 4-foot one. And it's a pretty heavy jack. It's a solid, rugged jack. And but the thing about having that jack is if you get mired somewhere, you can actually lift your truck right up with that,
Get it up out of the
and
mud.
you can get it, like if you got a tire that's sunk in the mud or down over in a ditch, you can lift the truck up with that and put wood or stones or something under it to let it back down on and get out. Because what happens usually, you get stuck more by getting high centered anyways. You get down in some mud off of the edge of something, and your frame or something gets hung up, and that's how you end up getting mired. And no matter what you got for tires or whatever, if you're hung up underneath, it might be the frame, or it could just be a front or a rear axle. Done that before. Slip off the side and down into some ruts, and your rear differential's up high and dry. But a high lift will get you out of that. Now, that being said, you got to have a place to put those. Like, you're not going to hook it onto the side of your pickup. You got to be able to, have, your front bumper or your rear bumper to get it under the lift with. But it'll lift the whole front or back of a truck. But I always try to just do it one tire at a time. Lift one up, put something under it, put it down, lift the other side. Maybe carry a patch plug kit. Usually in the fall, it's especially when the snow comes, you're not going to get a flat tire because all the shale and all that crap is covered over with snow. I tell you something about the tire chains. It's easier to put them on before you need them than once you need them.
Yep.
Yeah. If it looks like you're going to need chains to get through something, stop, get out, take 5 minutes, 10 minutes to put your chains on, and then proceed. Because me and my nature, I'm usually like, I can make it. And get mired in it, and then have to put the chains on while you're I did that last fall. I was I think it was that day me and Ryland tracked that big one, and we run out of time, and we had to get back. He was headed south, and the truck was north, and we got out. We probably still had half an hour of daylight, but jumped in the ram charge. It's a big, long hill to come up, and there was the snow was deep enough where my differentials are 12 inches, and I was pushing snow with the differentials in the road, and since underneath the road wasn't frozen, how it gets greasy, from the heat from the ground, and I'd come down the hill, but once you pack it, it seems like it turns it to ice, huh? You pack it down. So I headed up the hill, and I started going sideways, and I was almost to the top. So me being me said, I can make it. So I'm squirreling. The next thing I know, back tire, driver's side, it dropped off the edge, and it's one of them excavated roads that the ditches are pretty deep. They're like down there 4 or 5 feet down in there. And there I was, and I tried backing up and getting over, and I could wiggle a little bit, move a little bit, but I couldn't. I knew, and the truck was sitting like almost a 45-degree angle. I knew I wasn't getting up on the road, so I didn't have anything to get the winch to either. It's all open up in front of me. There's not a tree I can reach with a winch. So all we did was get the tire chains out, and I got the snow dug out around the tire that was down over the edge, and I can put mine on. Usually the easy ways to put tire chains on is lay them down and drive on it and then flip it over. But I can get mine on if I put the middle of the chains over the top of the tire in the center and bring both ends down. I got enough links on the ends to get it. It might not be tight enough to begin with, but if I can get it hooked on the inside with a hook and then at least get one link. I usually just hook the last link inside because it gives me more slack outside. And if I can even if I can only get one on the outside to buckle to, But if I can get 2, I'll take whatever I can get and buckle them on. So I got that tire. Then we did the one on the roadside. And I thought I could drive out, but by then, by moving, I'd got the front tire down over a little bit. So I took off, and of course it's going to go, like I said, with them tire chains. It's going to go, and it started, and I could not get up out of there. So I'm going up the ditch, like crabbing up the ditch, and I can't get up over onto the road. So I looked, and I could see the ditch just in front of me wasn't quite as deep, and it was like wide. It was wide enough to get the ram charge right in. So I just steered it right into the ditch, and I ran right up the ditch until I got up near the top of the hill, and I got some momentum going, and I just turned and I shot right out into the road, and I got both back tires in the road, and away we went. Yep. So anyways, put your chains on before you need them. And I thought about it before I headed up the hill. I go, geez, maybe I ought to put the chains on. And again, me being me, I said, nah, I can make it.
Well, before we go any further, I'll tell a story, but while we're on the Ram Charger, why don't you, if we've never shared it before, why don't you tell them about the moose hunt where you had to do some finagling and some MacGyvering to get back to town?
Yeah. Well, that's part of being a guide. You got to be a MacGyver, right?
You got to make stuff.
You got to make things happen. You're back in the woods, and quite often you might be by yourself, or you might be somebody with you, but you're the only vehicle, so you got to figure it out. But yeah, we had a group of moose hunters. We had 4 or 5 hunters up there in Zone 4, and we were up by Baker Lake, and they had just built the bypass on the St. Oriole Road to bypass St. Francis Pond, I guess. So they bypassed that, and the road was new, and they'd built it up, and they ditched it out, and it was good ditches, and they were trucking on it. So there was a lot of activity, but it was Jim he was the last man standing. I think he was the last bull, and they went out and they shot a bull that morning right up on that main road. And they'd called it, and it wouldn't come out, so they went in the woods. So it's in the woods there, I don't know, 100 yards or so. But anyways, they said, we got to get the ram charger to get this out of here. So I said, yeah, all right. So we run up, and the ditch was really steep, down in there. And when I went down, my plan was just to go down in the ditch, because I could have pulled a moose from the road, but they were trucking. I didn't want to block the road when the trucks came, be in the middle of the road trying to, winch the moose out. So I drove down off it and up the bank on the other side and stopped. And then we winched the moose from there, got it winched out, turned around. And then I looked at that spot when I'd come down off of that bank. And I mean, it was almost straight up. I dragged a kind of a big boulder right out of the bank. And I go, I can't try to get back up over there. So I backed around, and I hitched the moose on, I think, to begin with, thinking I was going to drive up with the moose on the back of it. And I'm looking down the ditch, and it's steep, but as it went down a little bit, it wasn't quite as high. It might have been 3 feet high. So I'm thinking, I think I can kind of ride up, like crab up onto it and get up over there. Well, I didn't realize, but there was a little water in the ditch, not much, but the road was so new it hadn't set up. And when I got the tire down in that ditch. I mean, it sunk like a stone right down onto the front axle in that muck. So I got out the first time. I backed it up, and I got out, and then I said, let me get another stab at this. That was the next thing, instead of just figuring something else. So we unhooked the moose anyway. We had to get that off. So I think what we did was we put a shiv on a tree and pulled the moose back away from me. Tried it again, and that time I drove that corner of the bumper right into the side of the bank there, and it was done again. So Jim goes, I'll pull you out. So I said, all right. So I had it down into low range, and I I'm just sitting there waiting for him to get hitched up, and he's got a nice cable, probably 100-foot cable or something there, and I got them big tow hooks on the bumper, and he hooks it on there. And then he hooks it on his truck, his pickup. He had a 3/4-ton Chevy. And then the next thing I can see is like this loose cable in the road, and he's backing up. And then all of a sudden it dawns on me, he's going to use that cable like a snatchy strap. And it was too late. I couldn't do nothing about it. He takes off, and all I could do was try to help him a little, you know what I mean, to give a little power to it. When that cable come tight, it went pow like that, and I barely moved. The ram charger wiggled, and it went pow. I felt it underneath there, and I go, oh no. And of course, he come up short too. The truck wasn't going anywhere. So he backs up, and the right tire in the ditch was, like I said again, it was right under the mud there. And I went to, I was in gear anyway, but all of a sudden it was like spinning. Well, it had, when he pulled on that front tire up against the bank in that ditch, so the axle didn't go anywhere, but the truck did, and it sheared, the force of that sheared the center pin right off of that leaf spring, and the axles with the U-bolt slid right down it. So the axle is sideways like this. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So I'm thinking it over now. I'm like, well, that didn't work very good. So I probably gave him hell for doing it. But so anyways, I said, we got to take care of the moose. The moose is still laying there. So we got to take care of this moose. So we pulled the moose out in the road, and we had another pickup there or something. We loaded it in the truck, got him on his way, had down and get it tagged, and we camped at the campsite there at Baker Lake anyways. And so it's Friday about noontime, maybe 1 o'clock now. And I'm like, oh, they got down at the Pelletier camp there on the St. Oriole, there was loggers staying there. And I said, I bet I can hire them to bring a crane up. The crane would pick the front of the truck right up and drag it on the road. I said, yeah, that's what we'll do. So it's on the way. We got to go buy it on the way back. So we jumped in the back of somebody's pickup. I don't know if we were in the pickup with the moose or what it was, but we were going back to camp, got down to the camps, and I forgot. They always quit. They either don't work Fridays or they quit at noon, and there's nobody there at the Pelletier camps. I'm like, now what? So anyways, we keep driving. It's another 3-4 miles down to the lake. Time we get back by the campsite, I had a plan formulated, and Kev's brother was there because that's the year he got drawn. And I said, I had my other truck there. I had that half-ton, that 96 half-ton Ram, and he had one. I said, hey, you mind helping me pull my Ram Charger out with your truck? I said, I think with 2 trucks we can get it. And he said, no. I said, let's go. So we all piled in the 2 pickups. Chris was there, and Kev and brother and stuff. We drive back up there, and I figured with mine, because that truck was high, that half-ton I had was real high. My idea was to hook the chain around the bumper and bring it right up tight, back right up over it, because it's down in the ditch. And I figured that the angle would pull up as it pulled forward, and I knew I'd be spinning to try to get it up. So I hooked up to that, then we hooked a strap from my truck to Kev Brothers' truck, and I said, we're just going to put it in low range, first gear, and we're just going to go easy. We never spun a tire. Just started to go. It lifted that Ram Charger, the front end, right out onto the road, pulled the whole truck back end and all right up in the road. And Chris couldn't believe it for one thing. But so the worst thing is this whole time, Chris don't even have the camera rolling. You know, he could have been filming the whole thing. We don't have any of this on film, but we didn't have Scott at the time to make sure we did.
Yeah.
So anyways, Chris said, why don't you pull it over here? There was a little wide spot there where it was kind of wide enough to get off the road. He said, why don't you pull it over here and we'll come back and get it this was a Friday. So he said, we'll come back and get it over the weekend. And I said, no, it's going back to Jackman with us. He goes, what do you mean? I said, I'm driving it home. And he's like looking at me like, are you crazy? So anyways, we unhooked, and because the axle's still like this, and it took us 10 minutes to get the mud and crud and clay out of the wheel well to even see what we needed to do there. That's when we could see that the head slid down. And when it did, that's why I couldn't go, because when it slid it down, it pulled the front drive shaft spline out of the yoke. So we got the mud picked out. I took the front drive shaft out, and I had a big aircraft ratchet strap, big, wide, heavy strap, and we hooked a strap on. I had my truck, I hooked the strap, and I pulled the front axle, straightened it out with the truck, pulled it so it's even. I put the big ratchet strap around the back axle and the front axle and cinched it up. So now it can't move ahead. Well, we started down. I fired her up and headed down the road. Well, the bumps on the front end, what was happening was it was rattling it back. You know, it couldn't go forward, but it could come back. So twice we had to stop, just going them few miles, and pull it back into place, pull it back tight, and I'd go real easy. Anyway, we make it back to the campsite, rolled into the campsite. Chris goes, what are you going to do now? I said, I've already got it figured out. I had it figured out driving it back. I always carry that chain come along in the back of the ram charge, I always would come along and moose up into the back, to twitch them out. I got out the chain, come along out of the back. I hooked it on my tow hook on the bumper. Took the chain down around my front axle and back up, and I jacked it back. I cinched it up and pulled it up too, and I looked at it, and I got it where it was, even as I could see it was, and then winched it up, and I put all the pressure I could on the strap and the come along, and I had lost the bottom. That had the lift kit, so it had a 5-leaf front spring, and the bottom ones were short. They were probably 8 inches long. When that went ahead, that's down in the mud somewhere. I lost that. But I knew it couldn't go nowhere because couldn't go forward, couldn't go back, so it was going to stay there, and drove it back to Jackman.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Good story. I ended up, I'll tell one about one of the rigs I had, and I got a new Dodge in like 2009 or 10, and somebody named it Killer Vanilla. It might have been you.
I almost think Kev did.
But I bought it through Uncle Henry's, and it had a 5.7 Hemi with low miles, and it was just what I was looking for. And when I called, the guy wasn't there and his wife was. And not that it really made any difference, but I asked a bunch of questions, and then for some reason I said, what color is it? And she said, vanilla. And I said, what? And she said, yeah, she says, it's a beautiful truck. The color is vanilla, but she said it's like an off-white, and he's put all kinds of chrome on. And it was, that was a sharp-looking truck.
It was a nice truck. Yep.
Beautiful truck. So when I first got that, I got it just before we were going to go off for the first moose season, and it had Goodyear Wrangler, probably 4 plies, but at the best 6 plies. And I knew those would be no good up in the North Maine woods because, they're just a junk tire. So Bob Sapinski it had 20-inch rims, so I had to have 20-inch tires, which aren't, back then they were even less common. So he was going to try to get some up to me. But anyway, long story short, we didn't end up with the 10-ply tires. So I thought, well, I'm going to just have to wing it. And you still had your 96, I think it was, that had 20-inch rims on it. And by then it was all wore out and everything. You were using it for your bait truck.
Right.
So it was at your house parked there. And before we went north, I had, the tires were basically new, but they just were, junk tires.
Yep.
And I had the spare, and I had a patch kit. You talked about having a patch kit. I had one of those. And then I robbed 2 10-ply tires off your bait truck. I think I jacked it up in your yard, took the 2 rear tires off it, and threw those in the back of my truck. It was a good thing that I did, because by the time Moose Week was over, I had patched every one of those tires and had both of your 10-ply spares, one on the front and one on the back. And when I was coming down off the Kelly Dam Road, just about the time that I hit 201, it had a light on it. If you had a flat or a leak, it would show up. I just made it onto 201 and the light came on again. I said, I hope I can make it to Jackman because I ain't stopping. And that was my first trip with Killer Vanilla.
Yeah.
But I ended up killing, I just had a good string there for the 5 years that I had that truck. I had 10 moose in the back of it between the 2 moose seasons, and they were all smashes except for the very last one. And you'll remember this story because you were with me. I ended up, it was after you'd sold your business and you had that no compete clause, so you weren't doing any guiding. But I had booked 4 moose hunters that week, and Steven and my other 2 guides had their moose. But the 2 guys I had, and they were great guys, they were good to be out with, but we'd seen a 60-inch moose on Monday and Tuesday, or Tuesday and Wednesday. And for whatever reason, we didn't end up with it. It was just a beautiful, beautiful moose. So by Thursday, I'm like, well, we can't just mess around with this one moose all week. We got to go find somewhere else. So you had called me on Friday night, said, are you guys all done moose hunting? I'm like, well, the other 3 guys all got their moose, but I said, I got to go out in the morning. And you said, well, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to go up on the Enchanted Road. There's a little side road up in there that's more or less discontinued, but I'm going to go up in there. And you said, well, I'm bored. I'll come down and just go with you. So you met me at the end of the Enchanted Road, remember?
I remember.
We went in, and at the end of that road that you could drive if you wanted to, but nobody was driving down it. It was pretty ruddy and pretty muddy. You went down the old discontinued road that went back out to 201, just walking around, and I took the clients down in there. Well, it was the same bull. We'd passed on him, I think, Tuesday and again on Friday. Well, he was still down there on Saturday, and it was Saturday morning. It was like a 35-inch bull. And I'm like, well, I said, you guys want to shoot him? It's the last day. And they're like, yeah, we probably should. So they shot him, and he just wandered off. So I went down, and there was a little bit of blood, but not much. And I was not, they were like, oh yeah, we hit him, there's blood. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, but there ain't much. This does not look good. So I said, you guys wait right here. I said, I'm sure Hal, we hadn't been down there hardly any time. I said, I'm sure Hal heard the shot. I said, we'll go meet up with him, figure out what we're going to do. So we got down there. You remember we tracked that bull with very little blood. He would just drop a little blood once in a while. And he kept crossing that. It was like a little tributary, a salmon stream. And he'd go over it, then back over it. And he went up into some cuts. But every once in a while, he'd just dropping off blood. I bet we tracked that moose a mile. Don't you think we tracked him a mile?
Yeah, it's quite a ways.
It was a long ways. But I'd already told, when I met up with you, I said, one of these guys has got a Remington pump. And I said, when we catch up with that moose again, if we do, make sure that guy's got that thing empty. And I'm going to tell my guy too. So we finally, after tracking that moose all that way, we found a place on the brook, and the beavers had made a bog. And when we caught up with him, I saw the moose there, but I had to make sure it was the same moose that they'd shot at. So I think I had my binoculars. I looked, and I'm like, yep, that's him. And I either grunted or cow called or something, and he stood up and looked at us. and they commenced to fire. And do you remember that? They were hitting him all over the place, and he was stumbling and thrashing. So they get him down, and he dies in the middle of the brook there. And then we don't even know where we are. We just kept following that moose.
I'd never been down there in my life.
Luckily, you had something for an app on your phone. It wasn't on X. I don't remember what it was, but you had something for an app on your phone. Well, let me finish the story.
I think it might have been just a GPS or something.
We ended up, you and I split up and said, well...
It was Earthmate.
Earthmate?
Yeah, it comes with the InReach.
Yeah. So we decided we were going to split up, and you headed kind of northwest, and I headed southwest, and said, we got to find because we were planning on cutting him up and packing him out. And I went through a place where Bigfoot couldn't have found you. I mean, it was...
Yeah. I did too.
And just a mess. And I thought, how are we going to get this moose out of here? And when we met up at the road, I had a horror story and you did. And we're like, you looked up on your Earthmate and said, if we made a great big loop and went back out to Route 201 and came back up on the North Road and went in. At the time, you can't even get in there now because they got it rocked off. But at the time, you could drive most of the way down in there. You said, I think we can get closer from the other end. And that had something so we could see the woods didn't look like it was as thick.
Yeah, it had satellite imagery, yeah.
So I remember I had to hike. You waited there at the road. I hiked back through that mess a second time and told the clients, I said, you wait right here. We're going to have to go see if we can get a better way to get this moose out. So I think we just hopped in my truck. Yeah, we left your truck there maybe. Doesn't matter. No, I think we drove your truck out 201 and left it. Drove my truck around and you just followed. And when we got to a little side road, you said, well, I think that's heading in the right direction because we had marked them. So we drove down. At one time, I think it used to be a road, but it had grown up. When we first started down in there was the remnants of a beaver bog. Remember, there was like a little dam
I remember seeing when I went across that early, I remembered seeing some old tracks like a Jeep went through it. So I said, that's got to be able to get out through there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were walking up ahead to make sure there wasn't anything too bad, but luckily it was firs. There were some places where it was alders, but a lot of places it was firs because it was up so tight against my truck that I wouldn't have been able to open the doors. A lot of places it was right up that snug. So I remember you had me drive down through that beaver bog, which was mostly dry. There weren't hardly any water left in it. Drove through that. And then we drive down this little narrow, it was more like a snowmobile trail than a road. And when we got down pretty close to where the brook was, there was a place, there was like some ledge there, so nothing was growing. Remember, I did like a 12-point turn.
Yeah.
It's the only place in there where you could have turned the truck around. We turned my truck around and back down to the brook and looked down over the bank, and the moose and my clients were there. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
You can't make that stuff up.
Yeah, we could get it with a
we got it with my winch.
Yeah. I think we winched it right off the rack, didn't we?
Yep, and we had to put a shiv in a tree because the moose was down over the bank, and we didn't want it to drag. So that winch that I had was good. You talked about your winch being in the front, not being as convenient. A couple of times with that, my winch is a 12,000-pound winch. It slid into my Reese hitch.
Right.
So if I got stuck, if you're stuck, it's way easier to pull yourself back out from where you've been stuck than through where you've stuck. So we put that shiv up in the tree, hooked onto that moose. And I remember we told him, make sure it's hooked on good. Pulled that moose out in the middle of the beaver bog and the rope let go. And so they had to go out, grab a hold of the moose because he started floating down the brook, got him back out, tied on him again, and got that moose out whole. And I can't remember if I lost my muffler on the way in or the way out. But remember, that had a 5.7 Hemi and the muffler came off it. When I headed back to tag that moose, that thing sounded like a stock car. I mean, I'm sure when I went down through Bingham, people were like, what is going on here? But yeah, Killer Vanilla. I had a lot of ventures in that truck.
Yeah. I think Kev named it that because it looked pretty cool when you got red blood on that vanilla. It looked pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we better end on that note. That's a good story. We probably got 1,000 other truck stories, but save them for another time.
Sounds good.
Yeah. All right, then. We'll wrap it up. And once again, subscribe, support the sponsors, and till next time, good luck on the trail.